One night in April of 1919, a middle-aged man named Eric Marth woke up in his bedroom in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because his entire bed was shaking. He saw his wife, Margaret, was lying next to him and she was thrashing around and gasping for air. But Eric didn't panic because he knew exactly what was happening. So Eric and Margaret had moved into this house just a few weeks ago, but pretty much right away after moving in, Margaret had begun having these very intense nightmares that would wake her up almost violently, like what was happening right now. Now, from Eric's perspective, these nightmares she was having looked horrifying, but there really was not any physical risk to Margaret. I mean, she would just have these horrible visceral dreams and kind of shake around, but that was it. And so, like he had been doing the past couple of weeks, Eric just reached over and gently put his hands on his wife's shoulders and began repeating her name very gently over and over again to try to kind of get her out of this trance she was in. And sure enough, a moment later, Margaret, who kind of stopped flailing, she let out this huge gasp. And then she sat up straight and panted for air, and she turned to her husband and she said, "I saw the ghost again." And when Eric heard this, he wasn't like, "Oh my goodness, there's a ghost." Instead, he was just kind of annoyed. And so he did his best to comfort her, but he's just thinking, what in the world is going on here? So a few years ago, Margaret had joined the spiritualism movement, which was a very popular religious movement at the time. And spiritualists thought they could contact the dead. Now, Eric absolutely did not believe in ghosts, and he was pretty sure that Margaret's staunch belief in spiritualism was now effectively causing these nightmares. That it was not the house, it was just her belief system. It was kind of manifesting in these nightmares. However, Margaret felt the opposite. She felt like it was the house itself that was haunted. And it was haunted by a vengeful spirit that attacked her every night in these dreams. Now, Eric, it's the middle of the night, he's tired, he's annoyed. He didn't feel like discussing whatever she believed about this ghost right now. So after she said, "I saw the ghost, I saw the spirit again," he just told her to, calm down, go back to sleep. But on this night, Margaret didn't lie down. She actually turned to Eric and she said, "No, I have to figure out what's going on. I have to figure out who this ghost is and why they're haunting me." A week later, a very resigned Eric sat at his kitchen table next to Margaret, and across from them sat a medium, which is a person who spiritualists believed could talk directly to the dead by conducting a ritual called a seance. The medium began to light some candles, and as they did, they told Eric and Margaret to close their eyes because she was ready to begin the seance, where he would ask the spirit haunting their house what it wanted, and they needed, silence and their eyes closed to do that. So Eric fully believed that this seance would be a waste of time and money. He didn't believe in this stuff at all. But he knew his wife did, and it meant a lot to her, and so he's thinking, maybe this can help my wife sleep through the night again. And so Margaret and Eric did as they were told, and Eric, he closed his eyes, and he listened as the medium began clearly rocking back and forth in her chair and began sort of dramatically calling out to the ghost and telling him to reveal himself. And at first, nothing happened, which was exactly what Eric had expected. But after a minute, Margaret suddenly jumped up from the table and ran out of the kitchen across the living room. And Eric, not knowing any better, just got up and followed her. And Margaret, she ran down the hallway and she threw open a door that led down to their cellar and she raced down the steps. Now, Eric was doing his best not to ridicule what was happening here and just to play along. But it's like, what is his wife doing? What's happening here? And so as he's chasing after his wife, he starts saying like, "Honey, what's going on here? Where are you going? What is this?" But she didn't respond. It was like she was on a mission. And then finally, when Eric got down the steps and he's in the cellar, he saw his wife, who was now standing in the middle of the cellar with her arms out wide. And slowly, she began to point to a spot on the floor. And in this really weird and hollow voice with this sort of vacant expression on her face, she told Eric to dig. Now at this point, Eric was totally freaked out. Not because he believed that the seance had worked or that there was a ghost here, but because his wife genuinely was acting totally bizarre. I mean, she was acting possessed. And even if that was an act, it was a terrifying one. And so he just said no. There was no way he was just going to start digging up the cellar floor. Like, what is going on here? But then the medium came rushing down the stairs as well. And they said that Margaret was in a trance, that the ghost in this house was channeling her, and that basically Eric had to do whatever the ghost said. Suddenly, Margaret's voice cut across the room again, and she said to Eric to dig up the floor. And this time she was more forceful and almost desperate, like, "You must do this." And so Eric, he's looking at his wife, he's looking at the medium, like, what in the world is happening here? But he's like, "You know what? I don't know what's happening. I'm just gonna dig. I'm gonna do what they tell me to." And so he grabbed a shovel and just began digging up the cellar. And after just a few minutes, Eric's shovel hit something in the ground, something hard. He thought it was just maybe like a big rock or something, but a few minutes later, after he and the medium and also Margaret, who's now come over at this point, they'd kind of cleared off whatever it was, they saw in the ground, what had previously been covered by the earth, was this rotten wooden box. And so he and Margaret and the medium, they pulled it out of the hole and they opened up the lid, and all three of them immediately recoiled because inside of the box was a human skeleton. And so after a minute of just, again, stunned silence, Eric just looked up at Margaret, who did not seem shocked by what she was looking at. This was like confirmation in some ways. And he says to Margaret, is this the skeleton of the ghost that's been haunting you?" And Margaret, with that same hollow voice, like it wasn't her voice, looked at Eric and just said, "No." It would turn out, according to the story that has been passed down about whatever happened in this house, that the ghost was a doctor who used to live in the house that Eric and Margaret moved into. And 18 years earlier, this doctor had performed an illegal surgery on a young woman, and this woman had died during this procedure. But again, because this surgery had been illegal, the doctor knew if word of what happened here got out, he would be arrested. So what did he do? He dismembered the girl's body and shoved it into this wooden box, filled the box with quicklime, and then he buried it in his basement. And amazingly, the doctor never got caught for what he did. And so he basically spent the rest of his life feeling very ashamed and guilty. And finally, when he did die, it was like his spirit couldn't actually rest until he confessed. And so this haunting was basically to get Margaret to go down into the basement and see what he had done.